Most of us have come across a time in our lives when we feel like we're just not good enough. It's that voice in your head and maybe even around you that says you need to change, work harder, be better, stop messing around, and just get to it already. And I think we look back on that moment as necessary, as something that needed to happen in order for us to work toward our potential, toward what some people would call their highest self. But what happens if this inkling turns into an unquenchable thirst for improvement, or feeling like you'll never arrive at the destination because you can always get better? Is that a good thing? Should we feel like we can always get better? In the world of Eastern philosophy, you might hear someone like Alan Watts say that there is no destination. There's no such thing as an improvement of the self, because the self is kind of an illusion.
What do you mean? What do you feel when you say the word I myself?
Or maybe you've heard the trendy terms on social media to just love yourself already and then things will get better. To just accept yourself as you are and that's enough. At some point, we have to figure out what the right amount of self-improvement is. Do we ever get to the point in time where we've sculpted ourselves enough? Do you ever just get to exhale and be in that moment? That's where the difference between self-improvement and self-actualization comes in. I think you know the former quite well. There's a self which you need to change. Somehow you've created a separation between the person doing the improving and the one who needs to improve, which is a very strange paradox we've all come to accept without batting an eye. Self-improvement says you need to invest in yourself again. You'll get the dream job and the perfect girlfriend after you prove yourself worthy. You'll make more money and people will like you more. And, all this talk of you need to love yourself right now, but also make sure that yourself keeps going toward something, some destination unknown, but nevertheless very important to get to. And I know what you're thinking. That's just one way to define it, just one way of looking at it. Because yes, you can absolutely love yourself and deem yourself as worthy and whole while quote unquote improving. But that's where I think there's a paradox we need to explore. If you want to improve, does that mean that there are parts of you that aren't good enough yet? If you were whole as is, then shouldn't you just relax already and decide that you've arrived? If you get more rewards from society as you improve, then when is enough enough? What's the end goal here? And on the other hand, what about self-actualization? What does that even mean and what's the difference? What happens when we're motivated solely by the internal rewards we cultivate? Is there a version of us that becomes totally comfortable with what existence is, with our existence as is? This is where I think Kurt Goldstein and Abraham Maslow had something very interesting to say. But first, we should break down what self and what actualization mean. The way we look at the self is actually really important here, because depending on your definition, you can change the way you perceive who and what you are. The Eastern view might suggest that what we think of as the self is an illusion. It's a construct we create to separate ourselves from others, from the world around us, and it might just be the ego view of our existence. I am a separate entity from the rest. That view of the self is how the ego would describe things. If we dig a little deeper, we can expand our definition to something like what Steven Pressfield suggests in The War of Art, where the self and the ego coexist and are part of a greater whole. The ego is a piece of the puzzle that we have to understand in order to get to our true self. So they're not necessarily separate, but more so parts of a greater whole. And as for how I personally look at it, the self is the individuated portion of your existence. I think that in the grand scheme of things, we're all one. I was always here and my soul is in this body today to experience a unique life path. So basically, the self is the combination of your egoic view of what you think you are, plus your essential nature as a human being, as a part of this universe. And you don't necessarily need to be spiritual to recognize that you're part of a whole. But I think that's why self-actualization is so interesting. To actualize is to make reality of, or it's the state of being actual or complete, to realize a vision or idea. And so, if the self is not truly a separate form that interacts with outside forces and constantly needs to battle with its surroundings, If the self is an act of nature, then actualizing the self means becoming what you really are, which is all things, the universe, existence itself. You're just here and now and alive and a vessel of experience. And so suddenly you're not becoming anything, you're merely just remembering. You're bringing into reality what you are already, what you were born as and what you developed as with your environment. This is what Goldstein was getting at when he characterized self-actualization as an individuation, or a process of becoming a self that is holistic. The individual realizes that oneself and one's environment are two pieces of a greater whole. Then we realize that the reason to do anything is not to gain something or win a game, but actually that our motivation to live a purposeful and loving life is because these are urges from within us that are present by virtue of existing. And so, whereas the idea of self-improvement elicits a feeling that you have a separate entity of the self that needs to morph into something else, the self-actualization view says, you're already that thing. You just have to peel the layers to reveal the core. The core is there. And really, self-improvement gets at that same idea. Because to become something, pieces of it already had to exist. You just need to create the environment for the essential true self to thrive. And that's the idea of realizing your potential. The you right now holds the key to the self that you also picture in your mind. You right now are whole and worthy, and because of that, you've got it inside of you, and you don't need more money or a car or the applause to feel like you're successful at being a human. So what's the point of striving for self-actualization? Well, that's the thing. What if there is nothing to strive for, but instead something to unlock, to remember, to settle into? That's kind of like what Wu-Wei is.
There is a principle called Wu-Wei. Wu means none or not, no, negation. Wei has a combination of meanings. It can mean action, making, but the best translation I have found for it is forcing. And so Wu-Wei is the principle of not forcing in anything that you do. The real Wu-Wei is not intentionally Wu-Wei.
When suddenly you stop trying so hard and things begin to work out, the mystery of less force equaling more abundance, more being as you are. And maybe that just feels better, more like an exhale. Here I am, and now what can I do? So how do you work hard and get better from that point of view? Well, I think we can recognize that it's about shedding more than it is about adding things to who you are. If your task was to settle into who you really are, then you must first go inward to learn about what you really are. What are you? What's your story? How did you get here? What's the mystery of existence that you need to experience? It's like that line in the movie Dune that hits you on a soul level. The mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience. Or like when the Buddha sits under a tree and in the slightest moment has his awakening. He sees what really is. And when we become more settled and relaxed into who we really are, not the story or the identity or the belief we bought into or that was forced upon us, then life really begins. Striving and evolving and getting better become your default because those are the factory settings. You are it. You already have it. Okay, so now maybe you don't have as much fighting to do. You can take a deep breath and get back to work knowing that you already have it all. You just need to remember.